Welcome to all of you, friends and some new faces. This is Dr. Florian Birkmayer, the Jungian specialist, and I'm Victoria Rabideau. This is my studio, and this is where we typically meet for most of our seminars. Is there a... If I stand over here.
Yeah.
So we have been working with the Red Book for about, well, since almost a year now, and it's been an amazing journey. And some of you are very, very familiar with the Red Book. I've talked to a bunch of you, and some of you are just going to get an introduction to it. What we hope to do today is to just give you kind of an overview of some of the themes that we've explored and some idea of the direction that we're going to go into. Generally, we have seminars once a month on Sunday, and they are more interactive. This is going to be more of a lecture tonight, but they're interactive. We discuss the images. One of our most precious assets is that Dr. Birkmayer actually can read the original German. A lot of the text is in medieval German, so even German speakers have a hard time reading it. So he is also retranslating a lot of the key ideas. There's a lot of translations that are not quite on the mark. So we also have quite a few German speakers who do come to the seminar, so that gets pretty interesting. And you're in a puddle of light. If you want to, if that's uncomfortable for you, you might just.
I'm waiting for that.
You're just as much off from not being in the light if you want to just move. So I'm going to just play this in the background and tell you a little bit about us. Let's see. There. Okay. So Dr. Birkmayer, Florian, is he's the scholar. He has a fabulous background, very similar to Jung's background. He's very conversant in mythology, comparative religion, languages, philosophy. He is a psychiatrist and a medical doctor, so very tuned in to alchemy and a lot of the mystic arts that Jung himself studied. I, on the other hand, am not an academic. I'm an artist, and I'm more of a phenomenologist. What I do is I lead dream groups and dream workshops. And so my understanding of Jungian themes comes from actually experiencing those themes firsthand through my own dreams and through the dreams of the participants that come to my workshops. I do a dream workshop every Tuesday, and it follows a similar form in that we talk first, open up the dreams, and then we do something creative to express that, to work with that. So this is kind of what it looks like on a Sunday. After we've done the intellectual exercises where we actually just get really deep into the conversation, opening up the themes and the ideas, that's the heady part. And in the afternoon, we work on our own Red Book themes and ideas. I generally create a guided imagination event, and then you heard Robin. Robin might be composing, others might be drawing or painting. Those who are art phobic, the whole corner over there is filled with imagery for found. There's Robin, there's Star, and so I have lots of found images, found text, that sort of thing. We do mandalas, we do decks of cards, or we make books. Any kind of creative expression is what brings these complex themes of the Red Book home into our hearts, hopefully, and we all participate. This is just to let you know a little bit about me. This is my own artwork, which you can see hanging around the studio. Afterwards, you're more than welcome to look around. You can handle the books and open them up and take a look inside. I'm also part of the Santa Fe Book Arts group, there are quite a few of us here as well. And the book is a beautiful way to contain this kind of information. So we're all Jungians at heart, I think. Let's see, is there... How am I doing?
Good.
Yeah? Okay, so there's a few pillows up here if anyone needs to come up closer. Dr. Florian Birkmayer is going to give us kind of an overview of the themes, particularly concerning paradox and transformation, which, of course, is the natural route to go. It's a perfect blend between dreaming and writing, creative writing, and actually being in the material. Oh, I should also mention that for those of you who are not familiar with the Red Book, this is Jung's personal private journal. It was not necessarily ever meant for anyone else's eyes, and in fact, he kept it under wraps. He showed it to a few people from his inner circle, but it was never to be published, or he left it vague, I should say. He left the instructions vague, but the family did not reveal it either, not within his lifetime or until 2008. And that is because there's a lot of insanity in it. He thought, actually, he started working on it after his break with Freud, and after his break with the analytic community that was growing up in Vienna. It was a huge loss for him. And so he went down into the dark night of the soul, and he started going into very deep personal waters and great despair, brought him there. But he was a scientist, so he documented this, and he knew that he was split from the beginning, that he was split between his intellectual pursuits and he was split between his creative endeavors. This journal is about what he received. A lot of his most fundamental ideas came from these wanderings in the Red Book. And so they are so bizarre, these meetings with remarkable imaginary figures, and the conversations, these inner conversations, could be construed as the ravings of a madman, and he knew that. So he kept that away from the public, and yet almost all of his really most profound ideas that have affected us all now, collective unconscious, the notions of the shadow, the anima animus, these ideas were formed in these meditations. And so what he did afterwards, he wrote all his academic papers afterwards, having discovered these things. But he never showed the source of the material. So it wasn't until 2008 that the family released this material. And so it's particularly poignant now, having been through 2 world wars, that his dreams pre-warned him of.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't mean to bother you.
That's okay.
Oh,
Are you having a...
Yeah, I'm just hard of hearing.
Oh,
If I can't hear your voice, would you mind mirroring this? It's just a little transmitter. I'll wait until. Are you okay with that? Sure. Sorry.
No problem. We want everyone to hear. So that's the kind of the basic overview, that the revelation of this book coming in now in these times, when we actually we are so familiar now with his notions, and many people call him the father of the New Age. And so now you can really tap into the roots. It doesn't seem quite so mad. Well, maybe that's an understatement. It does seem mad. But we are, as a group, I think that's part of the beauty of studying it as a group as well, because we all come to it with our different extensive backgrounds. It tends to attract persons of a certain ilk. We all have a lot of richness in the way we see the world, and the way we have studied throughout our lives, whether we're on the intellectual side yearning for our more creative side to come out, or we're artists and writers, and we're yearning for more of the intellectual pursuit and stimulation. It takes 2 of us to make one combination package that Jung was, being the intellectual and the artist. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Florian Birkmayer.
So let me start by saying I can talk for many hours, but I'd love for it to be more interactive. So feel free to interrupt me or to ask questions. I may use some jargon, so if there's any words you don't understand, just question me on that. And I think the most important thought today isn't really what does the Red Book mean, but really what is your own Red Book. I think we each have the opportunity in our life to go on a journey like this, and Jung sort of pioneered that, and I think that one of the benefits of the seminar, and maybe afterwards or maybe at the end, some of those you in the audience who's been at the seminar can talk about it. It's a real journey, and we have each other. It's sort of this community of madmen and madwomen. But I think the best way to appreciate the Red Book is through that personal journey. It's not just, I'm not really interested in it as a historical artifact or as a, curiosity in the history of psychoanalysis or depth psychology. But to me, it's really a living, breathing thing. It's words and images that have power, and that's why I think the way we share it with our friends in the seminars is it's really a living way of experiencing it. For myself, I don't think I would have ever read the Red Book as closely if I wasn't in the seminar. So it's just an invitation to go on your own journey. Let me see. Well, even Jung, and if I'm in the way, just holler. Even Jung himself, years later, he died in 61, 57, was a few years before his death, realized the personal importance of this book to him. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the evolution of the book, but I just want to start with this. He wrote, "The years of which I've spoken to you when I pursued the inner images were the most important time of my life. Everything else is to be derived from this. It began at that time, and the later details hardly matter anymore. My entire life consisted in elaborating what had burst forth from the unconscious and flooded me like an enigmatic stream and threatened to break me. That was the stuff and material for more than only one life. Everything later was merely the outer classification, the scientific elaboration, and the integration into life. But the numinous beginning which contained everything was then." So, and we'll see that as we look at some of the images where Jung himself acknowledged that that's where he got some of his most important ideas, in that numinous, raw, conscious form first, and then he went back and elaborated it in an intellectual form. So I used the title Paradox and Transformation. This is the only text I will have. But I just want to give you a little bit the lay of the land, just different themes we're going to work on, and maybe we'll start with that. But before we go, it's just the images just speak so loudly, so I wanted to start with some images. But let me go back a little bit and talk a little bit about the evolution of the Red Book. So as Victoria said, in 1912, Jung had broken with Freud, and it was a huge identity crisis for him, and he started having a series of visions. And having already worked as a psychiatrist at the Birkmayer the state hospital in, I was going to say Santa Fe, but in Zurich, he recognized these visions or these inner images. They were the same sort of stuff that his psychotic patients were telling him, and he was terrified. But somehow, he'd already had glimpses of this in his earlier work, that the phrase is something like the answer to the riddle is in the symptom. And he started first writing down these visions he had in a series of black journals, and that wasn't enough, so then he really spent many years elaborating these images, and really that's where this medieval manuscript comes from, that we have a couple copies. Meticulous, like a monk in the 8th century copying the Bible, but instead of copying anything, it was, the stuff that came from within him. But that attention, I think, is what saved him. It's like when your soul comes knocking, like Publishers Clearinghouse, are you going to be home? Are you going to be ready to get that check? And so the way to honor our soul's messages, our soul's text messages or emails, is to make art and to write down what we hear, even if, or especially because it doesn't make any sense. Because the sense is really in the living it. you get these numinous images. Numinous, it's a great word because it reminds me of luminous, but it means, it hints at something. You know, it's like the door is about to crack open and you can sort of see the glow, but you don't quite know what it is yet. So I think this was really a numinous entity, this book, in his life that really seeded what he manifested in his books later on. And I'll say now it's part of my interpretation, and this is by far not the only way of looking at it, but my reading of the book is influenced by my studying Jung's views on alchemy. And so even his last major work, The Mysterium Untitled, he's still working through themes that he stumbled across 50 years earlier. And again, I've had talked with a colleague who was frustrated because she said some of her colleagues were saying, archetypes are so abstract, I don't get it. And archetypes, you know, the reason most wars in the world happen is because of shadow projections. I mean, archetypes are constantly influencing us. They're manifesting in the world. You know, the Age of Aquarius, that's sort of an archetypal energy. Jung got in trouble for this, but you know, his interpretation of what happened in Nazi Germany was that it was a Wotan archetype, you know, that bloodthirsty warrior archetype manifesting. And archetypes can manifest in entire cultures, they can manifest in individuals. So they're not these ethereal subjects. This is really the matter of life and death. And one of the notions in alchemy is that the starting materials, the phrase is, it's what everybody rejects. You know, you have these random thoughts. I mean, you know, it's really the psychological content. You have this content, and it like doesn't make sense. And most people say, "Oh, I got to do my shopping tomorrow. I got to go to work. I'm not going to pay any attention to this junk." But that junk is numinous, and if you honor it enough, it really becomes the source of your life. It really becomes. There's a phrase in the Red Book that some of the most important journeys we go on happen in our imagination, in our dreams, in our visions. So, yeah, welcome to your inner world. We're going to talk a little bit about microcosm and macrocosm, and you know, each of us is really a universe within ourselves, and that's not. That may sound trite or like a fortune cookie, but when you really work with your own images, you really realize that bottomless well that gives us life energy. Other introductory things, as Victoria said, Jung showed the book to a few close confidants. It wasn't clear whether he wanted it published or not. It laid in the Swiss bank vault for 60 years because his heirs wanted him to be seen as a scholar and scientist, and that's actually what I think one reason he didn't share is because he realized this stuff is crazy. And there's, again, as I said, archetypes shape lives, shape politics, shape the world. These psychic energies are actually can be quite dangerous if you don't know how to approach them. And what happened in Jung's life is that he, as puzzled as he was by his own images, when he then started looking at alchemical texts, you know, there are different alchemical writings over the course of 2,000 to 3,000 years, as far back as ancient Egypt, and he saw similar language and description, similar images, and he realized do you guys know how a CAT scanner works? Like, it takes a whole bunch of x-rays and then it integrates them to reveal the hidden structure that you can't see. So the idea is, by having all these different people over the centuries, over the millennia, writing something that actually, you know, it took Jung 20 years to show the commonalities, but the language shows us the hidden structure of the soul, the hidden structure of the psyche, of the unconscious. And we're going to use the word soul and psyche and unconscious somewhat exchangeably, so I apologize, we can split hairs, but it's the realm of the soul, the realm of the psyche. One of the assumptions that I ask you to make for tonight is that the psyche is a real place. I mean, I used to be a materialist, and what a blissful cave that was to live in. But the unseen realms are real, you know, and these archetypes really exist. And I think the most disturbing is when you start meeting characters that you're not quite sure are you in the unconscious. And that was, I think, the big break with Freud. Then, even though Freud was an important pioneer and had he wasn't the first to describe the unconscious, he elaborated it, but it's still an atomic unconscious. It's like my own personal basement, if you will. But I think that when you go down the rabbit hole, literally, you realize that underneath there is an even bigger realm that's, you know, no longer personal. That's what we call the collective unconscious. In terms of the blow to the human-centric, egocentric worldview, you know, there's a description in Buddhism of, you know, when a wave breaks on the on the shore, you know, and it breaks and the little droplets fly off. That's like the human life, you know. For this few seconds, that little droplet's going, I'm an individual, and so this view that started for him with this journey, really, I think it's much more devastating than Freud to the human or the egocentric worldview, that we're really just these droplets in the ocean for these brief moments we have in the human existence. I just wanted to introduce you to some of the aspects of the Red Book and then give you just one, I think it's an important operation and structure that shows up in the Red Book, that shows up in alchemy, and that I think really is an important structure and process in the human psyche. So first let's start with some characters. There's a protagonist that is maybe a little bit more about the method. Who's familiar with the notion of active imagination? So it's a process that Jung developed of sort of daydreaming, sorry, that's an oversimplification, but you just sort of go into a relaxed, non-judgmental state and allow the images to come. So it is like, you know, like dreaming while awake. And so in a lot of the visions and the experiences came to him through active imagination, maybe some of them through dreams. Some of the characters, we have a protagonist, which I like to call the protagonist. I think it would be too simplistic to say, oh, that's Jung. It's just, you know, this avatar, this person that takes up different places, and this person encounters different characters along the way, which we'll talk more about that. And you can see he's dressed in white. This is one of the images, one of the capitals at the beginning of a chapter. Does that remind you of anybody, someone dressed in white like that? Elvis. Excellent. Excellent. Well, I was thinking more. I was thinking of the magician in the Tarot. So for those of you who are familiar with the traditional Rider-Waite Tarot, the magician is dressed in white, and so there's others. You can think of him like a blank canvas going through these experiences. Another character that we'll spend a lot more time with is this Sumerian or ancient-looking warrior type, and we'll talk more about who he is. He's a giant. He's much larger than the protagonist. He may be God. We can argue about that. This is an image. One reason I think, or one argument that Jung's heirs were finally persuaded to let the book be published was that certain images had already been shared in Man and His Symbols, as well as in Word and Image. And so the argument was, well, you know, we've seen these glimpses, let's please see the whole thing. Well, this is an illustration. It's this shady character in this shady room, and that's actually supposedly one of the first times we really meet a personification of the shadow. Now, everybody's shadow is different, but for Jung at that time, that was sort of a encounter with his shadow. And then the other character that's quite familiar to Jungians is Philemon. There's, the ancient Greeks called him characters like this daimon, sort of this personalized messenger from the collective unconscious, human except he's got wings. But you know, someone you can relate to. I mean, some of the trouble I think when you travel in these realms is you meet entities that your brain has no way of making sense of them, so they're kind enough to take a human form so we can interact with them as the personages that they are. The other theme I think that's really in looking at the, you know, we've been doing over the past year is reading it chapter by chapter, and so this gave me a chance to look back on the text in the different places, and the landscapes or the environments really play an important role. There's this beautiful capital letter, and you can see down here, but we'll have it a little larger in a second. This coral reefs and fish down here, so this sort of subterranean underwater realm, and a town with a ship, sort of a human realm, and then clouds, and up here you've got symbols for the planets, the comet, a big star, and the moon. So just again, it's this sort of total perspective, you know, from the fish, from the bottom of the ocean, up to the, not just the stars, but actually the symbols for the stars, so this really abstract realm. We have a castle in the forest near a lake, we'll see that in a couple different contexts, and several of the actions happen on mountain passes, and early in the Red Book is actually, the main division is, there's a Liber Primus, which is even harder to read because it's this really tiny script, and then the Liber Secundus, which is where most of the big images come from, that's in a more legible script. But in several places along the way, actions happen on mountain passes. In the Liber Primus, the protagonist encounters a traveling prince, and the way the story unfolds is he kills the prince, and we'll talk more about that, what that might mean. This is actually that same giant we saw on the previous slide, and the protagonist and the giant meet again on this mountain pass. So mountain passes play an important role. This is the image, the landscape image I talked a little bit about before, and I think, apologize for the technological limitations, there's this cauldron here with fire and this serpent rising up that's wearing a crown, so does it remind anybody of anything? There you go. And don't be bashful. So Kundalini energy maybe. Here's another one. So this is again, I realized the word landscape was limiting, but another setting, you've got this underneath the water up here, this geological strata that are sort of breaking open this sort of unreal eye. It doesn't look like a human eye, but there's something going on, this tectonic shift really, and here we've got this circulatory system that intersects 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So again, did Jung know about chakras then and 7 chakras? Probably not. I think it's just the more unclear you are, or the less book learning you have, the more clear the messages for the unconscious. And here's already in this talk, I don't have a lot of time to talk about the translation, but here's this beautiful visual pun. This chapter is called Die Bilder des Irrenden, which literally means the images of the wandering or the lost one, the erring in the translation, which is a rather odd choice. But if you see this, the word Irrender is broken up into Irrenden. So if you just read this part, it says Die Bilder des Irren, the pictures of the insane person. So there's this beautiful visual pun right here. Other landscapes, this is a tiny image, so when you enlarge it, it sort of falls apart, but the protagonist goes into the subterranean realm where he encounters these strange creatures in this subterranean red light. Another landscape is a tower, again, the Tarot uses tower imagery overlooking this beautiful landscape. This is that castle I mentioned. Sometimes we see it during the day, then we see it at night. So it's, again, these are real places in Jung's psyche, and I think in the collective psyche. You may have well had a dream and gone to exactly the same place. Here's a larger image of this of the mountain pass in which the giant falls down. We'll talk about the story. And again, you have the sunset and the stars coming out, but then you also have this sort of architectural thing, these arches and the columns. So you get a lot of these transitions. If Jung had had access to CGI, he could have done amazing visuals, but he did it with egg tempera.
How old was he when he started this?
In 1912 he was 35, and then he worked on it for about 16 years altogether. So it was maybe a little early midlife crisis, you could say.
What size did he paint in? Because these are very detailed.
This,
He actually painted this size?
the red book, I mean, one reason it's so big and expensive is because it's a 1-to-1 facsimile.
Because this is beautiful detail. in
Yes.
there. Yeah.
No, and again, the projector doesn't have great resolution, and the computer just never gives the full color. So I encourage you maybe afterwards linger a little bit, and if you come on Sunday when we do our next seminar, and every month thereafter, you get to pore over the red book for hours in sunlight, where you really see how luminous it is. One theme that I was struck by, and we already hinted at it with that Kundalini snake. I was looking for, what are some of the themes, and I realized the main animal, almost exclusively the only animal, I mean there's a tiny minor exceptions, snakes. This book is full of snakes. And that was, I talked about this, I gave a talk on this on Monday in Albuquerque, and what's the Freudian view of snakes? I mean, this is one of the ways to illustrate the split from Freud, but when a Freudian sees a snake, what do they think? Right, so phallic. But even the phallus is just a symbol. What's the energy? What is when you have all this, the images are really like the surface of the symbol of the archetype. So what's underneath the phallic energy?
Life force.
There you go, life force. And so we see these snakes at different times, and that's sort of what the Kundalini is also, this life force that goes up our spine. One place we encounter the snakes in the first book is we meet two characters, and in the first book, in the Liber Primus, the protagonist and the narrator are still really struggling with, this is crazy, like, he'll talk a little bit about a vision and then say, this is crazy. And he finally allows himself to take it at face value, accept it for real. And then he encounters these two personas, which we'll see in a couple slides, Elijah and Salome. And so Elijah is a biblical prophet that is portrayed as sort of this paragon of wisdom, intellect, equipoise. And Salome, anybody know what Salome did, according to biblical accounts?
She had John the Baptist's head cut off.
Excellent, excellent. So this sort of destructive feminine energy, and those two characters, we'll talk more about them, but there's sort of an irreconcilable difference between those two perspectives, and that's symbolized in the book. These snakes show up, and the snakes are really symbolic of the energy. The reason it's not easy to switch from an Elijah-like perspective to a Salome-like perspective is because there's a real energy at the threshold. And this is similar to the yin and yang, at the center of the yin and yang, what's there? This S that separates one from the other, and that is not just a boundary, that's actually an entity, an energy, like a snake.
Have you heard of the snake as a goddess symbol?
In different ways. It's the chthonic energy, it's also a Christ symbol. There's some Gnostic texts in which the snake is crucified. And goddess energy, the Hopi, the messengers to the underworld, the Nagas. So snakes are very powerful. And we see this a little bit here. So when the giant appears, it's a little hard to see, we'll have a larger image of him later, but there's all these serpents, winged serpents with golden wings in this, filling the sky. During a major transformative process, which we'll talk about in more detail, you see this volcanic snake almost, it's almost as Kundalini, but this looks like a volcano that erupts up, and then there's this just looks like innards and guts, and that's actually at a scene in the book when the protagonist is forced to commit cannibalism, or not forced, but invited to commit cannibalism, which is a fascinating seminar when we had that. More snakes. We see this sort of invisible figure that you just see by sort of the ripples in the texture that's piercing this character, and there's a snake that bites him. Earlier on, there's this, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, another sort of Kundalini-esque, chakra-esque energy, and you can see the protagonist holding this bowl, and this multicolored snake rises up to this colorful star, and then there is this, granted there is arms, that the serpent that the protagonist worships. The other thing that's really important, in a way my favorite image is the abstract realm that we encounter in the Red Book. And again, like what is this? And that's a letter D, okay, I know that, but what's all this stuff?
A window?
Huh?
A window?
A window, okay, so some sort of window, but what about these strange symbols?
Are they hieroglyphs?
Yeah, I mean, they speak to you. I mean, some of them look more Egyptian, some of them look more Mayan. You encounter all these symbols that, again, they must mean something, but we're not quite sure.
Well, they sort of have a feeling of a labyrinth too, in a way.
Yes, yeah. So you could sort of play the game and try to find your way through, and there is something very labyrinthine. And you can imagine, you get this vision. Thank God that you have the wherewithal to write it down or to draw it, because you could say, well, this is crazy stuff. But there is something there which we'll talk a little bit about. This is a beautiful one where it's just this perspective, these smaller polygons, and you just really, I know the color isn't that great in the LCD, but you just sort of, it's sort of this realm like you're just moving through this tunnel of light, if you will. There's this cellular looking thing, and again this other sort of eruption of energy that's disrupting again. Here these more colorful Mayan-like symbols, but you can see these. And one thing about this style is it's very high contrast. You can see very bold lines. To me, this looks similar to a couple analogies. When you look at the really old, or nowadays, children's versions of some of the kachina, they're often these simple wooden blocks with geometrical patterns on it. And my interpretation of these bold geometrical patterns is that's actually one of the higher realms of the collective unconscious. The other place you see it is in ayahuasca art. People who journey with ayahuasca, and some of the art they make again is this very high contrast feel, and I was looking for some examples, but couldn't find any easy ones. You get this, again, other abstractions. This is actually in a chapter where there's this tension between a maiden that's being wrestled by 3 devils, and they're in this balance of terror where the maiden has a silver fishing rod and is about to poke out the eye of one of the devils. So these are actually 3 serpent-like structures. And even though it's abstract, you can really feel the tension in it. And again, this is sort of, it goes between abstraction and realism, and that's just that beautiful transition. You've got a fairly realistic looking snake, but again, the fire is in this high contrast, very bold lines, the surrounding environment, and again here you've got this Egyptian looking boat that's carrying a sun disk. We'll see that again. This sort of more decorated fish, and then down here, again similar to there's just sort of, the abstract patterns are in a sort of general fish shape, but just on the, is it a thing or is it just a pattern? And again, there's these very abstract realms which...
You know what those patterns make me think of too, are some of the Maori
Yes, Maori tattoos.
that they do. And
So, so any sort of shamanic culture has access, I think, or any shamanic tradition, you can really access these states where you really see it like that. And so this is a real place to me. And maybe this is the real reality and all this is just a metaphor. And when you read the Red Book too much, you get crazy thoughts like that.
When he was working with people in the mental hospital, were they making art? Did he have them, or did anybody have them working with imagery?
Well, Prinzhorn, who was there was a very famous Swiss psychiatrist by the name of Prinzhorn. He was, I think, he wasn't at the Berghaus, I think he was in Basel or somewhere else. But he already in the middle of the 19th century was encouraging his patients to make art. Jung himself, I'm not aware of him
Yes,
doing.
he did.
Oh, he did?
Well, I don't know about it in that place, but he did always encourage his patients and clients to do the visual.
Oh, subsequent, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
once
so
he figured this out,
But not in the mental
I
hospital.
don't know.
I'm not sure.
They were probably already doing it.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, the vision seminar was based on the many drawings of an American woman who had this visionary art, and he was very interested in visions, and one of the records of that was artwork. His cousin that he studied for his doctoral thesis was a medium supposedly, and but I don't think she made any art. She just had visions. One way to I just stumbled across this slide recently again. So one way to explain archetypes is sort of these self-organizing principles, and we'll see it a little more later. But you know, again, maybe it seems abstract, but some of people in the audience familiar with chaos theory and strange attractors. So this is from a couple years ago in the Monterey Bay. They found that there is a sort of imaginary line in the water. I mean, even though it's just water, it's just H2O molecules bouncing around, fish moving in and out. This chaotic water organizes itself into this line where if you release ink or whatever, they release something, in certain places it stays in the bay, in other places it drifts out to sea. And this is not a firm line, it's a self-organizing line. And that's maybe one way to think about archetypes, is that they're these self-organizing emanations from the matrix, the matrix of the psyche. Another imagery that comes a lot in the Red Book is mandalas. This is not from the Red Book. On the left here is a alchemical mandala, and it's, you can't see it unfortunately, but it says microcosm, macrocosm. So already, you know, Leonardo's Vitruvian Man is similar. There's this equivalence between the human body and the entire universe, and it's again not just the body but the psyche also. So the entire universe is really within us. And over here is the Sri Yantra. Anybody familiar with that? So in Hinduism and Buddhism, it's, you know, it's a symbol of everything. You've got 27 intersect. I mean, you can find 27 triangles that represent different aspects, and then the upward and downward pointing triangles represent one level you can interpret as masculine, feminine energy.